Great. Well, welcome everybody to this Trails Talk for June with the World Trails Network. And we are really excited today to be hosting the Trans-Canada Trail and looking at questions around accessibility. How accessible is your trail? What does it take to make your trail accessible? And how can we learn from what the team at the Trans-Canada Trail have learned over the years in making this 28,000 plus kilometer trail across Canada more accessible for many of their users. So we look forward to hearing from Trisha and Mathieu and Joe and Maayan. So welcome to this talk, and over to you, Trisha.
Thank you very much. My name is Trisha Kaplan. I'm the National Manager of Programs and Inclusion Initiatives at Trans-Canada Trail. And I'm really happy to be here today to chat about Trans-Canada Trails, a few of our accessibility initiatives, and really our process and evolution to get where we are. So I'm just going to share my screen. Assuming that that all worked. Okay. So Trans-Canada Trail is situated on the traditional territory of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples from coast to coast to coast, and we are committed to Indigenous reconciliation. And I'm presenting today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx people who have lived sustainably on the land from time immemorial. So I'm really happy to be here today with a couple of our partners and a colleague. So I'm here with Mathieu Roy. He's the Vice President, Chief Trail Experience Officer at Trans-Canada Trail. Maayan Ziv is founder and CEO of Access Now, and Joe Milligan is Trails and Day Use Specialist, Park Planning and Facility Management with the Government of Saskatchewan. So I'll be turning it over at different points to each of them. So we'll talk a bit about the background and what Trans-Canada Trail is and how we got to where we are, what we're referring to when we talk about an accessible trail. And we'll talk about three of our key initiatives. And we just undertook a national survey, and I thought that I would share some early results about that. And then there'll be questions at the end. So I will turn it over to Mathieu for the next part.
Thanks, Trisha. So next slide. Trans-Canada Trail is 28,000 kilometers of trail network across the country, 500 trail organizations, 15,000 communities, and we're working with more than 500 stakeholders. One of the big differences between some long distance trail network and the TCT is that we are looking to connect every communities across the country, which is one of our priorities. So 80% of Canadians live within 30 minutes. So as soon as we reached the connection in 2017, we asked ourselves, what's next? What can we improve? We're continuing to extending the network, but the accessibility of the trail for all Canadians has become something that rise on our priority list. And this is in 2017 when we start bubbling and thinking about how we can improve the accessibility and how we can tackle this huge network of trail. Next slide. So we developed our strat plan around 6 main strategy for success. They are laid out there. So this presentation today really touched our first strategy, which is trail excellence for all. And yes, we continue to invest in infrastructure, improve culvert, drainage, the usual trail building stuff. But we are really pushing on helping our partners to go a step further and make the trail more accessible, think about inclusivity, diversity, etc. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by accessible trail? When we start thinking about this project, there's always we want the universal design, looking for universal design, make it the trail more accessible to everyone, all type of disability. At the same time, We also want to offer a range of trail experience in the network. And it doesn't, you can be an adventurer, and maybe the universal design doesn't fit for an adventurer trail, which is out of boundary and with a lot of rock, and let's say a double diamond mountain bike trail, for example. So we struggled to accomplish both at the same time, and we went through a process to define where we can act and how is the best way to act for us. We'll turn back to Trisha.
Thank you, Mathieu. So like Mathieu said, we sort of struggle to balance this idea of having trails that as many people as possible can access, while also having trails that as many people as possible want to access, and not everybody wants to access, you know, a trail that we think of as universally designed. So just a few pictures of what we would consider accessible trails in different ways that meet different needs. So of course, here we have an urban, paved, wide, low elevation changes. This photo is taken in Ottawa. And so this, I think, we will think of when we say accessible trails. But we also think about this. So we, this is similar, it's more rural, and it's gravel and hard packed. We think about trails that are available to people with different abilities. So a lot of the time we think about, accessibility, people who have mobility disabilities, but we try to remind ourselves of all the different range of abilities out there. And we also think about different devices. So this is a woman, her name's Anya. She works with us in accessibility mapping, and she uses a tricycle. And we also think about people who want to participate in all different activities. And so here, this is a dock located in Northern Ontario, and they've put in accessible infrastructure that allows people who have disabilities who are interested in paddling to be able to launch a kayak from this dock. And we also think about people who are seeking different adventures. So this woman, her name's Kimberly, and she has a spinal cord injury, but she's an avid mountain biker. So we really look at how mountain bike trails can be built to be accessible. So for people who are interested in that kind of adventure. So that might mean having more pullouts so that people can take more breaks. It will look like accessible parking and washrooms and other facilities on site. So we definitely have gone through a learning curve, and I'm sure we're still in the learning curve. We really started doing individual trail projects. So Trans-Canada Trail offers funding for trail groups. They can apply to us and they can say, we want to put in an accessible washroom, or we want to pave our trail and do things that make it more accessible. These were really sort of one-off projects, and we've been doing that for several years. And from that, we moved into maybe we should look at some other areas here. So you can see the yellow box, it's a certificate pilot project. So this was a pilot project partnership with Rick Hansen Foundation. And the Rick Hansen Foundation is a very, very well-known organization across Canada that does a lot of outreach and education around disability and accessibility. And they have a certification program. So they have a set of specifications and standards that I think most of us are probably used to. And you go in and you look at the trail and you identify what specifications it meets and what it doesn't meet, and it gets a designation of accessibility. So we did that in British Columbia at several sites. And at the same time, we partnered with a tool called Blind Square, which is a navigation app that I'll talk about shortly. And we tried implementing the navigation tool on a trail in Ontario. And coming out of those experiences, we really realized that we need to do more research, and we really need to understand how to approach accessibility, how to promote accessibility, and how to how to evaluate trails on whether they're accessible, and then how to share information. And coming out of a couple of years of doing research, we've landed where we are now. And so the top box is a partnership with Access Now, and you will hear Maayan speak in a minute. But that really shifted from using this set of specifications to working with people who have lived experience of disability in evaluating trails. The second box is accessible trail projects. So we're still funding those projects out in the community, but we're doing them with a little bit more of a 360 perspective. So if somebody asks for funding for, let's say, an accessible gate for the entrance to the trail, we are asking them to evaluate their whole trail instead of, so we're preventing a situation where there's an accessible washroom, but the trail itself actually isn't very accessible. And the last piece is really supporting tools and other amenities on the trail. So right now we have a project where we're funding, it uses an accessible fire pit. And we have other ones too with accessible viewpoints and other amenities and tools. So I will turn it over to Joe now to talk about a trail that TransCanada Trail was provided funding for. It's an all-persons trail in an area called Wascana. Joe is the Trails and Day Use Specialist with the Government of Saskatchewan. And I'll just briefly show you where we're talking about here. So you can see the province of Saskatchewan there. The arrow is pointing around where the trail is. The yellow line is the TCT. And in the zoom in, I guess, you can see it's where the circle is. That's just north of a city called Regina. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
Great, thank you, Trisha. I guess start off with, I'd like to thank the TransCanada Trail for this ongoing support that we've received as a province since the 1990s and continue to receive. It's been a really good partnership, but where are we located? So Trisha, next. This is Saskatchewan as it's located in Canada, and this is what our province looks like. We like to say that it's hard to spell, but easy to draw. Next. Next. This is sort of the approximate location. As you can see, it's sort of north and west of the capital city of Regina. Next. And it's a beautiful spot. You can just sort of slowly click these off, Trisha. But it's a nice spot about 20 minutes north of the city. It's about 250,000 people. There's approximately about maybe 350,000 people within maybe an hour's drive of it. Areas more or less surrounded by ranch land, farms, etc. We've been using it as an extensive trail network for since the 1970s. Especially since COVID, it's become extremely popular, walking, hiking, mountain biking, etc. And we've actually got a lot of excess use. It has pockets of native prairie, which, considering we have a lot of monoculture, that's actually a real treasure. So we've tried to maintain that as well as celebrate it. We have found indigenous sites around the area ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 years. One of them, which happens to be in the background of that photograph, you can see in the distance. Next. It's also a strong corridor for wildlife, as you can see, from mule deer, white-tailed deer. There's a great birding area for birds of prey, as well as the occasional moose, bear, and cougar that wander through there. Next. So this is what the site looks like itself. It's approximately 130.8 hectares, and it was originally developed in the 1970s for off-road vehicles such as dune buggies, motorbikes, and in the winter it was used for snowmobiles. We got the occasional story of the military testing armored fighting vehicles out there, which we weren't too thrilled about, but that's what happens sometimes. The all-persons trail, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, in the light green, is approximately 1,800 meters long, and it's the third. Actually, go ahead next. It's the third pathway, or accessible, or I should say all-persons pathway, that we built within the last 3 years. The first one being Condi, over on the left, which is about 800 meters long also. And it was repurposed a few years ago, and it's probably about 5 or 6 kilometers from Wascana. The second one, our major project, I should say, is Douglas Provincial Park, which is also part of the TransCanada Trail. And we more or less repurposed this particular trail within our provincial park. And it was let's just say I think it's one of the most exciting projects we've done in ages. Next. So what we try to do is when we were looking at our goals and objectives, I had three main objectives. First one being that it must provide a very up close and multi-sensory experience with nature on all parts of it. So whether depending on your mobility or maybe visual impairments, et cetera, you still had to engage the natural environment. Next, please. And go back to that first one real fast. This is I have 4 images coming up, and this is just an example of one of our areas of native prairie. This is about 80% native prairie. We've lost about 85% of our native prairie across the province. So any little bit that we can maintain is really a treasure. Okay. The site is quite beautiful. It has actually a lot of seasonal changes, and it really changes with the mood of the area really changes with the seasons. This was taken from our multi-use trail looking north about 4 weeks ago. And this was in winter, looking at the Wascana Creek. So you put the next slide, click. Our second objective is we wanted to create an experience to accommodate a variety of people with physical challenges. And for those who are interested, those are purple cone flowers where echinacea comes from the root. Next, please. So how did we do that? So what we did is really by doing our homework. We tried to basically engage people with a wide variety of mobility, visual, mental challenges. We talked to parents, young children, checked out blogs, basically engaging anyone and everyone. The young woman you see on the left with the cane and the dog, her name is Ashley. She's been blind since birth, and brought her out there in a pre-build stage. And it was probably one of the best learning experiences I've ever had. So instead of me sort of guiding her through the area and the potential trail, I basically said to her, as partly through her direction, I said, we want to go this direction. Here's what you're going to be feeling under your feet. So more or less, she was able to find it. There's a large hill behind her. She was able to navigate that at no issue, but she also hikes in the Rocky Mountains of Canada, so she has no issues dealing with that either. She was able to wind her way through a wide variety of trails, literally from detecting branches a couple meters before she got to them to whatever else. So that was a huge learning experience, showing that people may have visual challenges, but they have probably in heightened senses, which in some ways can help you with your planning. So that was very valuable. Next, please. Another person we engaged was Lisa Franks, who is from Saskatchewan, about 2.5 hours north of this particular site. She is also Canada's most decorated Paralympian, and just a real enthusiastic go-getter. When I was talking to her last winter, she happened to be in California, mountain biking, surfing, and just enjoying life to the maximum. So she was able to give some very valuable feedback from an adventure standpoint about what she was looking for in experience. And one of the things which she talked about, which concurred with a lot of other blogs, is she's not looking for a paved, flat pathway, that whether she be in her wheelchair or whether she be on her mountain bike, she can access a lot of areas that you would be surprised at. So she goes, I want an experience that basically allows me to engage with nature. So I thought that was really important. We also talked to a lot of parents, teachers, etc. Okay, you can go to the next one. The other thing we had to look at, we felt that design was absolutely essential. So we had to ensure that the surfaces were firm and stable, but still able to engage nature. So sticking with sort of the natural perspective of it, this is a repurposed crushed concrete. So we did 3 test beds across the whole trail, seeing how they would establish over the course of about 6 months prior to the build. Okay, next. We also looked at the absolute design. They always say that if you want to have a good trail, you have to basically design it to ensure that water stays off so people can stay on. We made sure that we fell within the guidelines of having sort of a maximum slope, an outslope of about 3%. You also notice the back slope. We made sure that it was under about 33%, and that allowed us to have maximum effective regrowth when it comes to these areas. So again, the regrowth and the material coming in is extremely important. Not only does it allow people to engage, but also for those who are visually sighted, whether you're using a cane or even just feeling what's going on, it provides that natural barrier as opposed to having put up a wood rope or anything else like that. So that was a very valuable learning experience. Next, please. We also looked at our grades. The 800 meters that we have for our new all-persons trail, it was all the grades were under 5%, and we had one section where it was over approximately 100 meters is 8%, but within that area, we made sure there was sort of platforms. We made sure that it was within reason for a person in a wheelchair with a stroller, even pushing a walker. And that's approximately a 1:12 ratio, which is within reason for a wheelchair. We also ensured that there were grade reversals of areas that flow off water. So design was absolutely essential. Next. So we started off and we got running a little bit late. We were very fortunate that we had an extended season. We've been going through a pretty strong drought for about 5 to 6 years previous, and we weren't able to get construction started till late October. So first of all, we flagged it multiple times, checking the grade with each flag. Then we bushed it, so we cleared it. And then we started basically removing the soil. And I think one of the most important things about this process is not the equipment you use, but the people behind the equipment. You have to ensure that your operators are very good and that they understand what your objectives are and who it's for. Next. The other thing I was constantly doing, I was on site probably about 90% of the time over the course of 5 to 7 days. And it was constantly checking the grades to ensure that they had the out slopes, main slopes, and basically working with the crews to ensure that that work was done properly. Next. There's just an example. They used quite a wide variety of equipment from mini to medium-sized excavators to skid steers. Next. They also, because of the season, usually like at this time of year, we're going to have light till about 10 o'clock at night. At that time, we were starting to get, let's just say this is about probably 5:30 in the evening. Next. And they actually continued into the dark using their lights because we were on a very short time frame, and we were very lucky because our window for construction was extended this year. Next. This was a first laydown. Now, the other thing that was really important about this is this is our first laydown. We also had it mechanically compacted as opposed to just laying down our material. Mechanically compacts allows it gives it a head start. Mother Nature has to do her work on it and separate it in different types of fines and developing it. But that basically allows it in the spring, it'll be ready to use automatically. We also ensured that we tried to use natural, I guess, assets such as the seed bed that exists in the organic material that we were removing. We put into areas to ensure that it would regrow. Next, please. And we also had multiple people. At this time, you can see there's at least 4 pieces of equipment working at the site. Now, the other thing is when you finish a particular project, it looks very unappealing, but you have to have time for Mother Nature to do her work. We were fortunate to have a lot of snow this year. We've had some good rains, and I can guarantee you that by probably within a month, you won't even tell there was construction there. Next, please. So this is what it looks like in spring. And I was or I should say about a month ago, it's grown back extremely well. Mother Nature has done her work where it's separated and the surface is firm and stable, and it's quite compact. Next, please. Just more an example. The other thing you'll see too is that it's not a straight linear path. The other thing we try to do is building trails is not just about the physical barrier. I tell people I don't build trails, I build experiences. So we try to create that experience within the trail. We're going by some natural wolf willow. There's some choke cherries along there. Each of them have different aromas and smells that come out over the course of parts of the season. And I thought that was absolutely essential. Next, please. You can see the trail in the background, way in the background. Next. Now, the third objective is something that I do with all of my trail projects. I came from nonprofit into government, where I worked for many decades. And with nonprofit, we have to engage other organizations, which I think is a really important mechanism for stewardship, for sustainability. So the Trans-Canada Trail has been one of our best partners over the last probably, like I said, since the 1990s. We've also worked very closely with the Saskatchewan Trails Association, who can reach out to not only parks and other organizations, but also they can sort of spread the word of some of the mission statements of the Trans-Canada Trail. We've also worked with other government agencies such as Saskatchewan Highway. So instead of purchasing material, I'm able to get a lot of material. So for example, this, I was able to get crushed aggregate, probably about $60,000 worth of it at no cost. I worked with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, more or less engaging them of what they were looking for. We worked with local stores such as Western Cycle, where we have a very strong mountain bike component to this area. The volunteers that you see in the image on the right are basically in the early stages of, or I should say in the early stages prior to construction, where we were looking at where do we need to go, what do we need to do. They're also members of South Saskatchewan Mountain Biking, who for probably the last 15 years have been some of the strongest component, or I'd say proponents of this particular area. And our final partner that I like to celebrate is Campus Public Regina. This is a high school program, which more or less engages youth from about 14 to 18 years old. And if you can get the next picture, we decided to put a bike repair stand station within this. And the gentleman, the young man in the middle of it, he actually designed a bike repair station. So when people come in, and the two young men on either side of him are the welders. So they basically created this bike repair stand. I provided the metal, and we're going to be doing an install probably this week or early next week of that. So again, those are just the three main objectives that I have, and we've been very thankful for the support from the Trans-Canada Trail, and we already have many other projects that we're planning to do in the future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. So next I'll share a recent project that we did in partnership with the province of Alberta at a provincial park called Fish Creek Provincial Park along a trail called Stream Changes Trail. And this relates to, again, blind square installation. So the arrow is pointing to where the trail is along the TCT. So it's in the province of Alberta. And you can see in the zoom in clip that Fish Creek Provincial Park is just south of Calgary. And so Stream Changes Trail was considered an accessible trail. They had made it pretty accessible. You can see the photo on the right is a clear pathway, there's no elevation change. It's wide, it's paved, and they had infrastructure as well, like the bench on the left that was really accessible. But they went into this really wanting to raise the game, raise the bar, and put in Blind Square technology. So Blind Square is a GPS app that's developed for people who are blind, deafblind, or partially sighted. And it identifies points of interest that are along the trail. And so when you're outdoors, it uses speech synthesizer, describing the environment. It might describe, it might do interpretive, like nature interpretation, directions, and other points of interest. When indoors, it actually uses beacons, and these beacons are installed and they send out signals with information. And so at this specific provincial park, they were really looking to not just have a trail that's accessible, but to really look at the whole site and how to make the whole site accessible for people with disabilities. And so they have an interpretive center that's located right at the trailhead of this trail. And so they went ahead, you can see it's a bison exhibit, and they went ahead and installed the Blind Square beacons on the wall. And so that somebody who was blind or partially sighted had access to all the same information in the visitor center as everyone else. And that's just a close-up of the beacon. And I'll hand it over to Maayan to discuss accessibility mapping. This is a partnership that we've had for a few years now to assess trails across the whole country using the lived experience perspective. And so I'll quickly share this map. This is the Trans-Canada Trail across Canada, and all those dots are all the trails that we've mapped so far. So we've managed to map trails in every province and territory. And so we did 12 the first year, 25 the next year, and we're headed for 25 again this year. And I'll hand it over to Maayan.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Trisha. This is such a fantastic conversation, and truly very excited to be here and to be taking part. A bit about me. My name is Maayan. I'm based in Toronto, and I am a person with a disability. I have used a wheelchair throughout my life, and access to the outdoors has always been something that I have loved to do, but often faced challenges, even just based on knowing where I could access and what I could do. And through the course of building the app that we have at Access Now, which really shares information about all different types of experiences, indoors and outdoors, we discovered that there is a really amazing opportunity, quite frankly, inspired by our friends at TCT, to kind of dig deeper into how we're sharing information about the accessibility of trails. Because one thing we learned is that when you experience whatever type of disability, there can be a lot of hesitance and almost psychological barriers that people create for themselves because they assume that many outdoor experiences will not be safe or accessible to them. And so our goal kind of going into the work together was to remove some of the barriers to information, to share enough accurate information that was authentic and trustworthy, that could promote people with various different lived experiences to actually think about how they themselves can see themselves outdoors, engaging with nature and on the trail. And so we really thought about, what is it going to take to provide people with a good enough sense of confidence that will allow them to make the decision to, go on a trip, leave their home, do a day trip, do an adventure, an excursion, plan an entire road trip or travel abroad, even just to go and see a space that would be, closer to nature. And so that's really kind of what we went into with the goal in mind, was to provide information as we do about all different types of places on the Access Now app, but with a more specific focus on the needs that the outdoors kind of shows up for us. So next slide. So what we created in partnership with the Trans Canada Trail was really a platform and a methodology to allow people, both with and without disabilities, to contribute to information that would allow people to make their own decisions about how accessible an experience would be. And kind of keeping in mind what Trisha had mentioned earlier, we know that people with disabilities are not all the same and not all looking for the same experience. And so we really tried to break down different formats and functions that people would look for to determine whether or not a trail would be, the type of experience that they're actually going to enjoy. And so we just established what we're calling the Access Outdoors platform and program, which basically is allowing people to download an app, and through this app, both note take and observe elements of the built environment outdoors that would inform people's thinking about how accessible a trail is, but also to create information that later on could be used to remove barriers if things show up. Next slide. And so the idea was for us to create an extremely accessible format in which people could actually do this work. So everything is within a mobile phone, everything that we've created. And the idea is that you don't need to be any specific type of person. You could have a disability, you could use a wheelchair, you could be blind, you could be any person really on the planet. And if you have access to a mobile phone, you would be able to contribute to the kind of collective information we're sharing. And so what we observed kind of in our first year of just thinking about what are the types of things that people look for out on the trail that really inform whether or not an experience would be accessible, we broke it down into 6 major categories. Terrain being the most important. Terrain is really the one that looks at the quality of the ground, the slope, the texture, the width, And those are the things that, first and foremost, allow people to determine whether or not the trail itself is actually going to be accessible for them. But then we also look at amenities as an example. And so again, Trisha had mentioned, the concept of a bench that had been installed on a trail. There are so many different types of amenities that show up for people that really make a big difference. And, something as simple as a rest stop or an accessible washroom can make a world of a difference to someone who is determining whether or not they can actually make their way out and still feel safe and supported. Access points is another huge one. I can't tell you how many times I've gone out on a day and realized that I've been able to access a trail experience, but I actually can't leave it for a very long time because there are many points along the trail that were designed as access points, but they're not accessible via staircases or bridges, or kind of just different barriers that show up that prevent me as a wheelchair user myself from actually leaving that experience. And so, I remember there was this one experience where I went and it was a really long, narrow kind of path and I was able to get onto it. But as we continued, it became fenced in and there were several opportunities for people to leave if you could step off a curb, and there was no curb cut anywhere along that journey. So I had to turn around and kind of double back just to leave that experience. And so access points, have shown up for people in many different formats, and we're able to actually rate the level of accessibility of access points as well. In the image on the screen, there is an actual photo of, I think it's actually Anya, who was mapping with us one of the trail segments, and there's 3 different levels of accessibility she's using to rate the experience of a bench, of a picnic table, which is another amenity that shows up, and I'll show it in a minute as well. And so what we've done is we really categorized from a subjective perspective first. We ask each person that we work with, and we ensure that someone with lived experience is on the trail doing this work with a guide or with someone who's responsible for the trail whenever possible, to think about their own perspective first and foremost. And that really acts as kind of the first testimonial, but not the last one. And the way we kind of measure accessibility is based on ease of access to that specific individual. And as each person contributes, we get smarter and more knowledgeable about how different experiences inform a level of accessibility. So whether it be an all persons trail that would be considered, green, thumbs up, accessible to everyone, or whether it be a partially accessible trail, which to our community notes a word of caution. So yes, there may be functions that you will enjoy, but you should note that if you have any specific high needs or specific requests when you go out, you might want to take note that there are certain areas or certain amenities that might not be accessible to you, and it becomes a holistic rating overall. So we include things like points of interest or places, hazards, notes of caution for people to be aware of, and of course closures, whether it be due to construction or changes in ground or really anything else. Next slide. So when it comes to kind of the way we approach mapping, there's really 2 different approaches that are fused together to create our overall understanding of accessibility. The first, as I mentioned, is including people with lived experience to actually go out and observe, what they see, feel, and sense, to take photos, to add ratings based on their own personal experience, and to add some descriptions as well. We go through a bit of a training program with each mapper that we work with to give them also a bit more context beyond their own personal lived experience to some of the different elements that they can take note of. So what you'll see on the slide here is an image of Tanel. She's a manual wheelchair user, and she is testing out a picnic table that actually has been specifically designed to include someone with a disability who's using a wheelchair to sit at the end of it. And so her ability to actually engage with it, demonstrate it, take an image, add that to the platform helps the next person who comes along understand truly from the words and perspectives of people from our community what's out there and what can they expect before they head out. Next slide. So in addition to the subjective information that's collected from our mappers, we also are in the background collecting a variety of different data directly from our mobile app. So the Access Outdoors platform has been designed to passively collect data that's incredibly important and helps us inform people and the folks we work with on the trails to kind of understand levels of accessibility that, you know, someone who's just kind of passing through might not take note of. So we measure the elevation of the trail, the slope and the side slope of the trail. We're able to determine even the roughness of the ground just based on our mobile phone, the app on the mobile phone tracking in the background. So every time somebody sets out on the trail, once they hit track and they're ready to go, we know, you know, if they've gone over gravel or if it was super bumpy versus if it was a flat packed trail. And we don't have to ask our mappers to note that. It's done entirely passively in the background. And that's really kind of where our secret science comes in. As kind of tech nerds at Access Now, we've developed some really great technology that just leverages the sensors in your mobile phone. So again, you don't need to purchase any equipment. You don't need to do anything but download the app, show up on the trail, and we can start providing this type of information. And once you combine, thanks Trisha, once you combine the kind of lived experience testimonial data with the more objective sensor data on the Access Outdoors platform, we bring together kind of this holistic picture of what an accessible trail can look like on the Access Now app. And so this is a screenshot directly from our website that's showcasing the Martin Goodman Trail, which is about 10 minutes from where I am right now. And what we've done is not only do you see, you know, for example, accessible parking or specific points of interest like parks along a trail, you actually have a line. And what this image doesn't show is that as you would zoom out or in, different segments of the trail can be colored differently based on what we've learned from our mappers and based on what we've observed from the recordings of our technology. So we'll have segments of the trail that are red, yellow, and green, and that will let people know which points they can actually access along the trail and how much of an experience is really going to be safe and supportive to their specific needs. And so once we've created our initial listing, this is what it will look like on the Access Now app. And any person from our community is invited to contribute further. And that's really, really important to note, is that what we learned was that in order for people to show up, they need to see something first. They need to have enough assurance that there is enough authentic and reliable information that will allow them to kind of lower their guard and know that they will be safe and have a pleasant experience when they head out. Because the alternative to that is planning, you know, a half day to, you know, get all your care organized, you know, get your transportation organized, perhaps rent, you know, an adaptive bike, head out to a trail and determine that the only way to access it is through, you know, a large flight of stairs. And if you had had the right information, you'd know that 15 minutes away from the access point that you thought you might access that is not accessible, there is an alternative access point that is accessible. And so having the whole picture on the app in advance really allows people to determine what they can do, how much they can do, and whether or not, it's the right type of experience it's actually going to be supportive. So some people are looking for, the high impact, high adventure. And so they will intentionally look at the partially and sometimes even the not accessible trails and make their own decisions. That's really what it's about, making your own decisions, being independent and allowing every person with and without a disability to have enough assurance that they can be part of an experience that isn't accessible. And that's really how we work to create kind of more accessible and inclusive outdoor experiences. So I went through a lot, but if there are any more questions, happy to answer after the fact, and really excited to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Maayan. That's awesome. So I just wanted to take 1 or 2 minutes and just talk about a really recent survey that we ran. And so it's just wrapping up now. So these are really early findings, but they're super interesting. And I just thought I'd share a few of them today and give you a bit of a glimpse. So this was the National Trail Accessibility Survey that TransCanada Trail put out in partnership with Access Now. And it was really about looking at how the disability community accesses outdoor recreation and the tools that they need to do so safely. And so we, as the name suggests, it was a national survey, but in the end, with social media, it traveled around the world and we got 360 responses from 20 different countries. And I'll just share a glimpse into a few of the results. So one of the questions was, how often do you use recreational trails? And more than half of the respondents said monthly, and the next highest was weekly. And much fewer were daily and very few were never. Why do you visit trails? So the largest, most significant answer was to spend time in nature. And the next largest was to support mental health. How long are most of your trail outings? So I found this interesting. So by far most people said between 1 hour and 3 hours, and the next was between 30 minutes and 1 hour. So almost no one said multi-day excursions. Very few said over 3 hours, and very few said under 30 minutes. So really we're looking at between 30 minutes and 3 hours. When you travel to other cities, do you typically use trails? And more than half said, yes, I love discovering trails. And another chunk said yes, but only if it's not out of the way. And I think that this really speaks to developing our trails as tourism destinations and making them accessible, because travelers with disabilities are seeking experiences. What stops you from using trails? And over half said, I don't know which trails are accessible. And I think this speaks to the value of what Access Now is doing. Yeah, I think it really highlights the importance of information sharing. What is your preferred format for trail classification? And most people said detailed information about the trail, like slope, surface, so I can make decisions based on my ability. And so fewer said the accessible trail designation, and fewer still said a rating scale based on effort. So really looking at providing that, like, this is the width and this is the surface and this is the slope, and people can look at their own abilities and their own interests and decide for themselves. What style of information is important? So we're seeing here, were the top 4: objective information and details, reviews and testimonials from other users, online maps and distances, and photos and videos. Before using a trail, which element is important to know? And the largest was tactile surfaces and edge protection. We also saw elevation changes up there, accessible washrooms, and trail width. If you had easy access to information on accessible trails, would you use trails more often? And a large number, majority said yes. And this really speaks to the number of people who would be using trails and who want to be using trails who don't have the information that they need to feel safe and comfortable. And I think this really highlights that communicating trail information needs to be a priority for all of us who work in trails. So lessons learned, and this is ongoing, but a few that stand out are that we need to provide a range of experiences along a network. No one community is looking for the same thing, and people have different interests, and that's really critical. Account for a range of users with all different disabilities. A lot of us think of accessibility as being mobility, especially with the global accessibility symbol. But I think it's really important to think of a large range. Communicating detailed trail information is critical, and we see that from the survey results. Sharing maps and distances online is important so that users can familiarize themselves before heading out on the trail. And also, and one of the most important, is to engage people with that lived experience into the trail development process. And that is from design to construction. So at the design phase, you can invite people with the lived experience to come out and look at your designs, help to develop those designs, and have them involved periodically throughout that process. And then, like Joe did before the trail opens, but towards the final stage, invite people back again to test the trail. But that lived experience is really a critical piece. And that's our presentation today. So thank you very much. I'm not sure if, I think we have a couple of minutes for questions, if anybody has any.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Trisha and Maayan and Joe. That was a really thought-provoking, set of presentations. And yes, let's please answer some questions. I know I've got a lot of questions, so mine might be a little bit technical, but let's see where we get to. Catherine, over to you with a question.
Great. Yeah. Thanks very much, everyone, for your fabulous presentation. My background actually is in your world, in the world of disability. And I actually served on the Canadian Standards Association Barrier Free Design Committee for many, many years. I'm just curious to know whether any one of you have incorporated any of the standards that many of us have slogged over for all those years. And also I'm curious from a consistency point of view, because as we know, the ADA has very consistent standards within the United States of America. And that was one of our goals when I was certainly involved with the Canadian Standards Association. So just curious about that.
So I'll just quickly say something, and maybe I'm not sure, Joe, if you want to jump in, since you are the one constructing trails out of our team here. But since the Trans-Canada Trail doesn't operate or manage any specific trail, and it's across the country with all different specifications, we personally don't have a set of specifications that we require trails to have. But Joe, when you were developing yours, I don't know if the government of Saskatchewan has requirements.
Actually, we do not have requirements for our trails, but the other thing I really wanted to stress is that I'm a staff of one, and until within about the last year, I've been doing trails off the side of my desk for over a decade, and so I've never labeled a trail accessible, because that would indicate to anyone wanting to use it that is up to a particular best practice standard or guideline. And because of an operations perspective, our parks work independently, which varies depending when it comes to resources, money, etc., depending on budget years. And so I cannot guarantee that a site will have the maintenance staff, the resources, or anything in years after construction. So I always say that you build a trail with the money and the resources you don't have. So you build it with maintenance in mind, you build it as solidly and as best as possible. But so I said, I do have to say though too that even despite what I've just stated, our province is working on some guidelines associated with buildings, but also they've taken a very genuine interest over the last 3 to 5 years with accessibility when it comes to creating picnic sites, day use sites, beach access with chairs, as well as beach mats that go into the water. So I said the biggest thing is you have to consider is that once you label something accessible, you have to maintain that level, and unfortunately we always can't do that.
Yeah, I think my question really was, the Canadian Standards Association creates standards that can be accessible to any one of our provinces and territories across our country. That's the resources are there. And I was just curious to know whether you, Joe, or anyone else on this call, reviewed them, use them as a tool. That's why they're there. That was my,
Yep.
that was.
We have that all the
You've
time.
got it. Great.
Yeah,
Excellent.
we're
Okay,
constantly using
that's fabulous.
and you also U.S. Forest Service, because they provide a little bit of a different access and a perspective on that. So
okay, great, good. That's great. I just I was hoping that would be the answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. So first of all, I'd love to congratulate Maayan on your app product, which I think is pretty amazing. And so while you were presenting, I actually went online, I downloaded it, I got it on my phone, and it immediately tells me where I am in the world. And I could see like a whole host of things in my country that have been mapped, actually quite a few, which I didn't expect. And a lot of it looks like, all sorts of facilities. It's not just trails. You're mapping really access almost globally, which I think is quite an incredible achievement. What I did love to hear was the how the handset or the phone itself becomes a tool, and I think Joe commented on that, for collecting data, and in particular, what I imagined there was this cross slope or the grade of the trail, which is obviously really fantastic development from your team. One or two questions that I have are, noticing on the app now, some of the places or access points that I logged into, I could see, that this was reported in like 3 or 4 years ago. Are you finding the problem reporting capacity sort of sufficient that reports come in time that people can make informed decisions? Or are you finding, and maybe linked to that is, what mechanisms, tools, or strategies do you have for encouraging kind of consistent updating of relevant data? So if I'm seeing there the trail was reported 4 years ago as accessible, okay, that's great. Is it still in the same condition like 4 years later that I can trust that data? So again, there any tools that you're working with to try and keep that engagement up?
Yeah, so a few things. So currently we're not mapping trails to the level that I showcased anywhere else but in Canada. So what you'll see on the Access Now app is a whole variety of things. You'll see stores and hotels and, schools and parks, but parks without lines.
Right.
And so this is actually our first development into lines, which is really kind of looking at how people are moving through space as opposed to where people are kind of dropped or landed. And so the majority of the data on Access Now, historically speaking, pre-pandemic, was entirely crowdsourced, entirely volunteer-based, and entirely based on initiatives or projects where volunteers who kind of work together to share information. And we have seen, kind of ups and downs of, when people are out. Definitely the pandemic put a pause on a lot of people within the disability community engaging directly, because people, and actually still today, are still quite anxious about being indoors and being inside spaces, which is actually another reason why we thought this is a perfect time for us to start looking at the outdoors, because we heard directly from the community that well, you know, if I don't feel safe to be inside with people, I'd love to be able to go outside and still have a day trip. So the trail work that we're doing is actually built through a separate process. We have the Access Now app, which is free for anyone to use. Like, you know, you just downloaded it, anyone can join and can contribute anything they want about trails, about, you know, restaurants, anything. The Access Outdoors program that we've developed kind of in partnership with Trans-Canada Trail is kind of our newest specific focus on engaging trail groups and organizations to be part of the data that is shared on the app. And so we started in Canada, and we're beginning now to grow beyond that. And it's really based on the appetite and interest of people getting involved to help us share that. So once we have the baseline, then we look at how do we engage community to get out and share their own reviews. So whether that's a social media campaign, whether that's signage directly on a trail where people can show up and say, oh, I could contribute that. There are many ways in which people kind of show up on the Access Now app. But first and foremost, absolutely, right now, our goal is to get the baseline for as many different types of experiences as possible. So that's kind of where we're currently focused.
That's really great. So maybe I would love personally from the World Trails Network to engage with your organization. We have in the World Trails Network, you may or may not be aware, a program called the Green Flag Trails program. And that is essentially a trail assessment and accreditation platform that is all about 4 pillars. The 4 pillars are accuracy of information is the primary one, so trail data that's accurate and engageable. The second one is environmental accountability, management responsibility, and the 4th one is risk and safety. So we grade a trail based on all of those 4 pillars, and we work not with a crowdsourced approach. We work with assessors that have been trained in the methodology to assess, I think it's in the region of now 150 different indicators that we measure. And it would be really great to see if there's a way for us to partner in some way with your data, or where we can list those trails that have been assessed by your technology, can also get the green flags sort of symbol or stamp or sort of, the thumbs up as Zach's just given us there. So yeah, the space is really evolving around accuracy of data that your trail users can make informed decisions as to what trail is best for their needs. And what Trisha was sharing was really great to see from that survey, Trisha, some of the information that users deem important. We sit back and think, are we going to design something? And this is what everybody wants to know. Only to find out, well, actually, no, you don't need to tell them what to do. They know what they want to do. You just need to give them the data that they can make an informed decision. And so this is really exciting for me to see how this space with accessibility is intersecting also potentially more generally with trail data that's accurate. And how do we, keep building on those baselines, as you say, Maayan. So certainly from my perspective at World Trails Network, I'd love to see how we can partner in taking some of these projects further and bringing in a broader group of global users that have relevance. So yeah, would love to connect on that level. I'm wondering if there are any other questions out there. I see there's still a few people on the call. Zach, perhaps anything from you? We've got a call, something there from Sue. Sue, please go ahead.
Hi, sorry. I'm wondering, I guess it's for Maayan, if someone wanted to get involved with mapping outdoor spaces, what would be the best way to do that? I'm in Burlington, so not far from Toronto, and yeah, there's not much since moving out here. Noticing there's not much in the way of outdoor spaces being accessible or being known to be accessible.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different ways you could get involved if you wanted to. The lowest, easiest, least intense way is to literally just download Access Now app and review anything you want. And you could search for any park or trailer experience that you wanted and add your own experience. If you were looking for something more involved, we do have a program in which we actually bring in people and work directly with members of the community on specific mapping projects. So if you were looking to, be assigned to a space or have, an opportunity to contribute even as a hired mapper with us, we have an entire program that looks at that as well. So if you are interested in that, you could just reach out directly at hello@accessnow.ca. And we'd love to just learn about what you're looking to do and see how we could match you with something that makes sense.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much. So it's hello@accessnow.ca.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's go on to Zach. Zach, and I think we'll make that the last question. It's been quite a long and informative presentation, so thank you. Zach, over to you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it so much. So many good visuals and just high quality information. An obscure question I wanted to ask is on the global, like, where does this movement stand globally? Can you speak to it at all within the global accessibility and disability and differently able communities? With, like, the technology that you've organized, is there Spanish language equivalent? Is there a Korean language equivalent? Have you done a confidence scan of that? So it's kind of that's the broad question. And then my really obscure question was just like on a design level, at like an iconography level, globally, is there a color that consistently across cultures identifies types of resources that are about accessibility? Or is there, like, to what extent is that organized? So I have kind of like, what's the general, if you could like paint the picture of where you all fit into how this is globally functioning, and if there's any place you could point me to understand just at a design level, at a symbol level, at an icon level, what I should be aware of. Thank you.
Should I be answering? Or
it sounds, so in terms of the global, like, I think Maayan, you might want to answer the question, and I'm not sure if Galileo has anything to add in terms of what's happening globally in that perspective.
Sure. So it's a really great question. And we, currently where we're at is that our app is kind of natively translated in just a few languages based on people who download. So we have it in English, Portuguese, we have it in French, and I think there's one more coming. But it's important to note what information in the app is in those languages. So the app itself, all the functions are, but the user reviews are then auto-translated. So they're not always perfect. And so we are looking at obviously expanding this to many other places and countries. But currently a lot of it is still very crowdsourced. And so this is kind of a newer initiative for us. And the goal is absolutely to share information all over the world. So it is something that we want to do, but we're a small team. And so we are growing every day and learning with the challenges of how to do that and kind of keep up with the demand that people are showing up with, which is amazing to see. And then in terms of kind of iconography and in general, I'd say, there's a pretty significant split between understanding the importance of a nothing about us without us approach, which means including people with disabilities from the design, decision making process, up until the marketing and the end result of how you share that with the world. In order for it to be authentic, you want and need to include people who represent the audiences that you're trying to reach. But there isn't, you know, like a global set of icons specifically about disability. There is one, and in my opinion, you know, it's got its own limitations, but there's kind of the forward movement symbol of someone in a wheelchair leaning forward. It's just showing agency and so showing that someone's active. So within accessibility, we just use like standard icons like that we kind of create within our own world that signal, you know, what a picnic bench is and what an access point is on our platform is like a star, which is just based on, you know, just practice and doing what everyone else is doing. So we kind of take it slightly differently in that we work really hard to make sure that anything that touches disability reflects and is built with people with disabilities. And as often as possible, we don't describe people, we describe the built environment or the world. And so people can make their own decisions as to whether or not they see themselves reflected in that. But I don't know if I answered your question perfectly. So maybe Trisha, you have something to add.
I don't, but I wondered if Galio had something to add in terms of what's happening globally with accessibility.
From my experience and observations, you know, this entire movement is essentially being driven by North America. So we're seeing, and I question to some extent from a global perspective, how much of that is dependent on resources, on engaged communities of, you know, specialist communities, so people with specific interests. And I think I think one mustn't underestimate by being pioneers in a way, both not only in the technology, but also in the motivation and development of trails or access to the outdoors more broadly, as initiatives, as trails, as, you know, organizations like Maayan's, that one's playing a pioneering role. And when one does that, one's really doing it for the rest of the world. So I know that places in Africa where I come from, certainly places more in Asia, this accessibility question isn't as high up the agenda because in different communities or different nations, there are different priorities that get a higher kind of sense of priority from a funding perspective. So I think, you know, one mustn't underestimate the role that you guys are playing in a way, pioneering some of these technologies and the whole culture and movement around like giving access to trails and the outdoors in particular for all people. Yeah. Tip, I wondered if you had anything to say, or if not, we can, I think, wrap it up there. Any last words from you, Trisha? And thank you indeed for joining us today.
No, I just want to thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been great. It's great just to chat with people in different parts of the world, since Trans-Canada Trail is obviously so nationally focused. And just also, I know that Joe and Mathieu both had a meeting a few minutes ago, so they had to cut out, but I did want to thank them and Maayan as well for joining me. And of course, if anyone has any questions, I had the slide for a while. It was our contact information, but and I know that you'll be able to see the video, but you can also contact the World Trails Network if you want to contact any of us.
Yeah, so thank you very much to all of you, and Maayan in particular for your insightful product, and Trish for a great overview of everything. And we will share the video with our members widely, as well as the contact details. So thank you very much for taking part in this Trails Talk in June.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.